I'm in Brixton at the moment, currently on my way to brunch with my mum. We're going to Turtle Bay bottomless brunch, really nice Jamaican food. But anyway, I'm here to do a quick episode summary update. Someone was... Thank you. Someone just gave me... Okay, I don't know. Okay, maybe I should record this here. Hold on, give me a minute. I've moved to a quieter area that's a little bit less chaotic. So today's episode, firstly, happy Monday, welcome everyone. Yeah, today's episode is an interview with an academic called Dr. Douglas Zytko. He is an academic at Oakland University. And so today's episode, we're talking about love in the metaverse, all things that are included in that, particularly also conversations around consent. Now, love in the metaverse, dating in the metaverse is different. We talk about avatars. He mentioned somebody using a potato sack as an avatar. It's just very, very different. So, and we also talked about things around consent. So with that, the episode does contain conversations about sexual harassment, sexual assault, and violence, which could be triggering to some of our listeners. So please bear that in mind when you're listening to this episode. So let me know what you think. I will try and do a recording after the bottomless brunch and see how that goes. Okay, take care. Bye. I'm back because I forgot to say hello to our new Amazon Music listeners. Hello, in case people haven't seen, Monday Science was listed on Amazon's Music Best Podcasts of the Week list last week. So super excited. It was great. Thank you to Amazon Music for recognizing Monday Science in this way. Thank you to all our previous guests, our listeners, our supporters. So yeah, and hope you enjoyed that episode. Bye.
Science. Technology. Medicine. Health. These four things make the world go round. Without them, we couldn't exist. This is the Monday Science Podcast, a weekly show bringing you the latest research and news in science, technology, medicine, and health, answering your questions or finding experts in the field to answer them. Your host is a pharmacist, an award-winning scientist. She leads her own research group and is the founder of King's College London Fight the Fakes. A tad bit on the qualified side. Welcome to Monday Science. Here's your host, Dr. Bahija Raimi-Abraham.
Welcome back to another Monday Science episode. Today we have Dr. Doug Zytko on the podcast. I mentioned to you just before we started recording, your research is of particular interest because I don't know anything about the metaverse. In fact, I held back on trying to even just search what it is. I thought, no, I'm going to go in blind and I'm just going to learn here. So I don't know anything about the metaverse. I didn't even know that dating in the metaverse was an actual thing. And yeah, so I'm really excited. So I just want us to get straight in. Firstly, could we start off with you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Doug Zytko. I got my PhD from New Jersey Institute of Technology, where I started studying use of dating apps in 2013. So I'm going on 10 years of research in this space. Right now, I'm an assistant professor in computer science and engineering at Oakland University. I'm also the director of the Oakland HCI Research Lab. HCI means human-computer interaction. And I'm also the chair of the computer science and engineering PhD program here at Oakland University. In terms of the research that I do, broadly speaking, I study the role that technology plays in interpersonal harm, including how technology predisposes people to becoming perpetrators or victims of harm, and how technology can be designed to prevent harm at scale. And I'm particularly focused on what I call online to offline harm, so harm that manifests in the physical world due to things that happened online. And the context through which I do most of my research, as you might have guessed by now, is online dating, because use of dating apps is a significant risk factor for sexual violence, especially against users that identify as women or LGBTQ+. And because so many people use dating apps, I think that they have the potential to mitigate sexual violence at scale if they were designed to do so.
I read a couple of your papers, and the vulnerability bracket was very interesting just to note the certain trends. And I know we're going to talk about that further. Before we get to Metaverse, could you explain the difference between augmented reality and virtual reality? And hopefully that can help us get to Metaverse from my own understanding.
Sure. Let's start with those terms. Let's throw in another term, which is mixed reality, and then we'll make we're taking the scenic route to Metaverse.
Okay. And can we take scenic and slow?
Okay, scenic and slow route. Okay, so augmented reality. This is the easiest one for people to grasp. We're talking about Pokemon Go, is what we're talking about, where you have the physical world and you're transposing virtual objects on top of that. The device that people today most commonly use for augmented reality is probably their smartphone. Like if you ever played Pokemon Go or any kind of similar application, if you tried to assess how some new piece of furniture would look in your house and IKEA lets you see virtually how it would fit, that's all augmented reality. It's just transposing virtual objects into a real physical space. Virtual reality. So once we go from augmented reality to virtual reality, now we're talking about 3D virtual spaces where what you see is completely virtual. And you're typically accessing virtual reality spaces with a headset, a virtual reality headset that completely obscures your vision of the outside world. You usually have some kind of handheld controllers to manipulate your movement and use of particular objects in the virtual space. And then we have mixed reality, where these are technologies that would enable you to traverse between this augmented and fully virtual space rather seamlessly. So we're starting to see some consumer devices come out to facilitate this. Most recently, probably the MetaQuest Pro, which is a headset for VR, but also enables augmented reality, so you can switch between those two modes. So those are kind of the underlying terms. Now we get to this term, the metaverse, which we've heard about somewhat recently, but it's been around since 1992 from the novel Snow Crash to refer to this idea of, yes?
I was going to say, so it's not Facebook that made it up.
No, it's not. No, this term's been around for over 30 years now.
Wow. Sorry, please continue.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it came from science fiction, although not so much science fiction anymore. And it generally just refers to a virtual universe, a virtual world. So like I'll look out my window right now and I can see trees, I can see buildings, I can see people walking around, I can see people talking to each other. It's exactly that, but in a virtual space. Now, some people might be wondering, well, wait a minute, we've had this for a while. We've had these virtual worlds. I've played massively multiplayer online games. I've had Second Life and World of Warcraft. Why is it catching so much buzz now? And it's because of unique affordances for social interaction enabled through VR headsets and augmented reality technology. Two of the, I don't want to call them buzzwords, but two of the big terms in this space would be immersion and embodiment. So immersion is this sense that you're quote unquote really there. So when you put a headset on, depending on how that world is designed and what kind of interaction and capabilities are afforded to you, it can really feel like you're in that virtual space. And then embodiment is this sense of you have a body within the virtual world. You're not like in a typical video game looking at your body on a screen. You can see your arms, you can see your torso. And also when people interact with you, they're interacting with that virtual self, that virtual embodiment. That's the metaverse. It often is talked about in conjunction with other emerging tech concepts. Things like cryptocurrency, Web3, virtual real estate, because of this idea of, we can have a fully decentralized world, society that happens completely virtually. So I hope that catches you up on those underlying terms.
I'm taking notes. I didn't know Metaverse. You might have started something for me there. I didn't know about Metaverse and cryptocurrency. So I just want to go back. So with the Metaverse, there's two main types: immersion, and what was the other one? Sorry,
embodiment.
Embodiment, immersion. So with the immersion, do aside from the headsets, would the individual be given like a suit where they can feel? Yeah, I guess what's the design in creating that full feeling? Aside from yes, you can see your arms. Do they get a suit that's coupled with that?
Maybe one day. Right now, most consumer devices, what users have access to are the headset and then handheld controllers. But even that has been enough to instill this sense of immersion within people. There's a somewhat classic study now where someone has their virtual arm on a table and it gets stabbed and they feel like they're actually being stabbed in the physical world. So it doesn't take too much in terms of the technology given to users to feel the sense of immersion. Although there's absolutely early attempts at devices for what we would call haptic feedback. So this feeling of physical touch. We have some prototype gloves for that in my research lab right now. And we can imagine that as the years progress and we're starting to see this proliferation of not just VR headsets, but AR glasses, AR to VR headsets, that we're also going to be seeing more consumer affordable haptic technologies, maybe a haptic vest or a suit, as you refer to as well.
As you were explaining the different things and how they've all come together, something that I was thinking is two things I was thinking. One, did you ever watch the series Black Mirror on Netflix? Yeah. So to me, I was like, okay, so I've seen this episode of Life. Then the second thing I was thinking of is, aside from the interest, like the technical interest in developing these tools, and as we know, especially in the field of science, of technology, we're constantly researching and taking things to the next level. My question is, do you have any insight as to how we got from, okay, there's this metaverse, this world, to the link with the human need for this world? Do you see what I'm saying with that?
Like, I think we're basing a lot of this on assumption of a human need for the world.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So this kind of like techno-determinist vision of the future of, oh, the technology is there, so people must want it, people must use it, which might not necessarily be the case. I mean, there's statistics and predictions that the augmented reality market is going to overtake the virtual reality market.
With augmented reality, 2015, I had a social enterprise which was all about street art, combining street art, public art with STEM research. And at the time, there was a lot of people, there was more artists that were looking at using augmented reality, particularly in America, actually using augmented reality to try and engage people with art and kind of expand how art was being used and in spaces they could be in. So it was very interesting. Okay, we'll get back onto the metaverse and dating. So how do virtual reality environments, how do they impact the formation of relationships and dating dynamics?
Oh, this is okay. Let's open this can of worms. So most of what I'm going to say is more predictive because we're in really early stages of what we would call the dating metaverse. We do have a few different applications available to users that are in various stages of public release, and we can talk about those. So a lot of the empirical evidence around dating in the metaverse comes from what we would call these more general purpose social VR applications that aren't designed for dating necessarily. There's research showing that long distance couples or people that have already been dating, they'll use VR to enrich their relationships, to spend time together, even fall asleep together in VR. There's an HBO documentary, We Met in Virtual Reality, that recounts some experiences of users of these general purpose VR applications for forming and enriching their romantic relationships. Now, when it comes to the dating metaverse, so by which I mean virtual reality dating applications, we're talking really early stages to the point to where some of them aren't even fully available yet. There's three, from what we're seeing there and what we can easily forecast out into the future, there's three different ways in which VR can be impacting dating dynamics, as you would call it. One, which we're seeing in some early applications like Flirt and Never Met, the application itself is just a mobile app like you would see with Tinder or Bumble or the like. And what it's designed to do is connect users together who are already social VR users, so that once those users match in the application, they can segue their interaction to a general purpose VR environment for virtual dating, virtual interaction before presumably a face-to-face date, even if they even want to progress to that stage. And then in those applications, the users are represented with their virtual avatars as opposed to their physical appearance. So that's one way in which we see VR intervening in dating, is it becomes this kind of intermediary point between discovery of someone online and then a face-to-face meeting. Another way that it could be used, which we're seeing in applications like Singletown in Korea and Planet Theta, is the way in which you discover a potential romantic partner is in VR. So we can think of a virtual bar, a virtual nightclub, essentially, where we have these physical world spaces that we all understand, where others will congregate with the anticipation of potentially meeting some kind of romantic partner. We can imagine that in VR. So these public VR spaces where strangers are meeting other strangers for potential dating expectations. And then the third is private VR dates, where regardless of whether you met someone through Tinder, through a typical mobile dating app, or you met someone in a public VR space, you can then segue that interaction into a private area to have a one-on-one interaction. We see this in Planet Theta, for example, where they scaffold these private dates with answer session between users. We can imagine with the way that some of the haptic technologies might be going, that users could also be using these private VR dating locations to have some kind of cybersexual interaction as well. So those are the three ways in which we can imagine VR within what we would call the online dating.
What are the unique challenges for metaverse dating? And do you have any insight as to how they could be addressed?
Well, I think there's a lot of challenges, potentially even more challenges than benefits at the moment. Some of the ones that would be probably the most obvious are, how do we really evaluate attraction or romantic compatibility, given the capabilities for self-expression, self-presentation in these environments? If we look at general purpose social VR applications today, people tend not to look like people. A lot of the times you can go on these applications and someone could look like a cartoon character. I've seen a user literally look like a sack of potatoes. If we imagine a VR dating environment and users are crafting their avatars to look like their favorite anime character, what kind of implications does that have on romantic compatibility, especially if those users were to decide to meet face-to-face? So that's one issue, is the accuracy of evaluation of potential partners online before you meet them face-to-face. The other, and the one that I find to be far more significant, is safety. So this kind of connects a little bit with those evaluation struggles, because if you have users that are relatively anonymous in a VR dating application, that reduces the sense of accountability for behavior. And then also because of this embodiment capacity for immersion, this richer interaction will also enable richer forms of harm. To give an idea of the type of safety concerns we're in for with VR dating applications, I'm going to briefly go over some of the harms that we see in dating apps today, and then some of the harms that we see in social VR today, because VR dating is really going to represent the convergence of these harms. So with dating apps, there is ample research now demonstrating a quantitative link between use of dating apps and sexual violence. And sexual violence and other harms that happen in online dating, they're rather unique because they can traverse between these online and offline modalities. So online, you can be really harassed. You can be a victim of cyber flashing, meaning you receive an unsolicited nude image. And then when you meet potential users face to face, now you're also exposed to the risk of physical harm. We're talking about rape, bodily injury, unwanted touching of the body. Those are the harms that users are typically exposed to in dating apps today. And then when you look at social VR on its own, these general purpose social VR applications, there's been really excellent research coming out over the last few years. I'm thinking of Blackwell and colleagues as early as 2019. And then more recently, research led by Will Freeman at Clemson University that have looked at the unique types of harassment and harm that are facilitated through social VR. And we can look at those along three different lanes. One is the capacity for verbal harassment, because users can verbally speak to each other in VR environments. You have issues of hate speech, sexualized language, personal insults. And then there's the capacity for physical harm, meaning harm against one's avatar. This is unwanted touching or groping of the avatar, making sexual gestures with one's avatar. And then you have environmental harms. These are things like drawing phallic imagery in the virtual environment, displaying sexual images or videos that others can see, or throwing virtual objects at other users. With those in mind, we can see that VR dating applications could be exposing users to harm in both of those areas at the same time.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. But, unfortunately, we don't have enough time for me to. Literally every point you were saying, I was like just trying to just Not even imagine, but already with dating apps, there's that risk, but at least you can. I'm not trying to say one is less or worse than the other, but I'm just trying to think, at least from my own experience, if you see something, yes, you can report it, but you can. I think that there would be a different impact from seeing a unsolicited picture on your phone. Go away. Yes, it's traumatic. But then if you're using something where you're feeling, you're sensing, I can't begin to get my head around it. It just sounds really challenging. When you talk about the different types of avatars that people use, I guess it also is interesting because with virtual dating, do people just have long relationships where they're just dating in the metaverse and they never meet in person? Does that happen where they just in a relationship in the metaverse, so whatever they look like or whatever they've been attracted to between the two doesn't really matter in the real life?
So
real world?
I'm not familiar with quantitative evidence of that, meaning the frequency of that. Have we seen examples of that in popular media and even in some of the qualitative research? Absolutely. As to its prevalence or how normative that will be as more users potentially come to adopt VR dating applications, I'm not particularly confident that that's going to be a normative use case.
Yeah, I'm trying to link from my understanding of online dating and linking that to the next question. How does the anonymity in Metaverse impact trust and intimacy in virtual dating and virtual relationships?
Right. So when we look at anonymity in current social VR environments, and even in these early VR dating environments relative to anonymity in more traditional mobile dating apps, users are far more anonymous in VR. And that's largely because the design really prevents them from being any more of themselves. There's limits around how much of our physical appearance we can even show in VR. And then if you think of the more traditional mobile dating applications, there is absolutely the capacity to be anonymous. Users can fake their profiles. There's extensive evidence of romance scams and fake profile creation. But within VR, it's kind of harder to be less anonymous, even if you want to, because technical limitations around how much of your physical world self you can express to others.
I did want to ask more questions around self-expression and authenticity because of the use of avatars. It's one thing in the non-virtual space to have a profile photo that might be a little bit older. Maybe the person is at late 30s, but they posted something when they were mid 20s. But when you meet in person, you can see the differences. In the virtual space, how does the fact that you can use avatars, you mentioned sack of potatoes and different things in virtual environments, how does that influence self-expression and authenticity?
So, I mean, it's very easy to look at the negatives of that, which is what we lose to that self-expression, which is the physical world self. But on the positive side, there could be some benefits. So I'm thinking of research as early as 2008 from Frost and colleagues, where they had this virtual dating environment where two users can go on a date in a museum together. And they were represented literally as a ball. They didn't even have a bodily avatar. And they were showing benefits to evaluation of compatibility, because what that does is it kind of forces users to focus on the non-physical dimensions of romance. Do they enjoy interacting with each other? Perhaps do they have similar interests? Can they carry a conversation well? I think there's some benefits there in terms of the non-physical aspects of evaluation.
Okay, what do you think the future is then of metaverse dating?
In terms of the future for metaverse dating, I really think the future, we see it. Let me restart that one. The future of metaverse dating, I see traversing online and offline. I think it's wrong to consider metaverse dating as strictly VR dating applications. I think there's a lot of potential and probably demand for AR capabilities in dating as well. Because if you look at the dating app market, even if you look at the current VR applications, and especially if you look at the mobile apps, there's really no support or intended use once users meet face-to-face. It's like once you've decided to meet face-to-face, the application's done its job. And unfortunately, that's where the risk of harm is the highest. So right when we most need assistance, scaffolding of safety, is when we're not getting it. I see a lot of potential there for augmented reality to support user safety. Just to give like an example, perhaps you could have some friends virtually participate in at least maybe the first half hour to an hour of a date to kind of assess, does this person that I'm meeting look a little bit creepy? Are they giving off some red flags? And then maybe if things look okay, they can go on their way. Or maybe if a user finds themselves in a risky situation, they can easily call their friends to at least virtually be present with them to kind of assist them through navigating, leaving a location or whatnot. I think there's also some really interesting capabilities or questions around this traversal from virtual reality into an augmented reality encounter. So a lot of the research that we've been doing in my lab has been looking at why sexual harm occurs through online dating. So trying to supplement the excellent research that's out there around more of the quantitative link, we're looking at, well, what is the reason that this occurs? And one of the reasons, which I think is going to be amplified within VR into AR, is what we would call sexual scripts and what we would call consent practices. So a term that I discovered in the psychology literature, the public health literature, is this term called rape myths, meaning these erroneous public understandings of why sexual harm occurs. For example, the inaccurate belief that perpetrators always intend to cause harm. Sexual assault happens because one person intentionally intended to assault another. That's wrong. In a lot of cases, users don't even realize they were the perpetrator of sexual harm because they misunderstand or misread their partner's willingness to have a sexual interaction. Another example would be that victims always know that they are the victim of a sexual harm while it's occurring. And that's also not accurate. So sexual scripts, as I was mentioning before, they refer to these socially constructed beliefs around how sex is supposed to happen. And some of those beliefs obfuscate understanding of sexual agency, meaning one's own right to decline a sexual advance. So some of the research, not within online dating, for example, would show that when women invite men to their dorm room late at night, they perceive an obligation to have a sexual interaction because of the assumptions around, oh, this man must be expecting sex because of the time of day in which I'm inviting him to where I live. And then in dating apps, we're seeing these unique sexual scripts emerge as well. So in the research we did on Tinder, we're seeing users, particularly cisgender men, interpreting fairly innocuous signals in the dating app interface as consent or as agreement to sexual behavior. For example, we had a man tell us because a woman had a profile picture in a bikini, sent a message to him that had a winky face emoji. She never mentioned sex explicitly, but because of those things, he assumed that the reason she wanted to meet him was for sex, and therefore he didn't ask for permission before touching her in the physical world. The reason I think this connects to AR and to VR dating is the richer interactions that users will be able to have in VR could be predisposing them to expecting particular behavior when they meet face-to-face. For example, if two users in VR dating are having a private interaction, a private date, and a user is touching the other user's avatar in a sexual manner, they might assume I can continue that kind of behavior as soon as I meet this person face-to-face. Because it was okay in VR, it's going to be acceptable face-to-face. Or because I shared a virtual kiss with this person in VR, obviously I'll be able to do that in the face-to-face world as well. I think there are a lot of questions around how we navigate our understanding of acceptable behavior when we traverse that virtual and augmented reality form of dating.
Oh, that was so insightful, so informative.
I probably piled way too much on there. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, please don't apologize. That was perfect because it's just a completely different world. I think it's also seeing the links between online app dating and considerations there versus what then happens. So thinking like when you were talking about potential benefits of virtual dating and how it could help with safety. And then the example you gave of the individual, how they interpreted something, the messages into it's just like, wow, you just see the different issues. But then I hadn't thought of what you said that with having the virtual dating or virtual element could help people feel a little bit safer when they go on dates. And I thought that's quite good because a lot of women, when they go on dates, they might share their location with their friends on like WhatsApp or whatever. And I don't know if it's the same in America, but in the UK, a lot of bars have posters or something in like a note or poster in the toilet where they'll say, oh, you can go to the bartender, and there are things that you can go to the bartender and say a certain phrase, you want a certain drink, and there are things like that that are in place.
What did you think of the episode? It's interesting, right? This world of the metaverse, or maybe some of you already were aware of the metaverse as well as metaverse dating. If you were and you want to let me know, feel free to email me at info@mondaysciencepodcast.com. Next week is the part 2 of my discussion with Dr. Douglas Zytko. And next week, we're talking a lot more about consent advice and guidance for those who might be interested in exploring the world of metaverse dating. So thank you once again for listening to Monday Science. I am so grateful that people do listen. I love the podcast. Why am I confessing this? I don't mind. But yeah, just thank you so much for listening, and have a great rest of the day, great rest of the week. Thank you again.
You've been listening to the Monday Science Podcast, a weekly show bringing you the latest research and news in science, technology, medicine, and health. We hope you've gotten some useful and thought-provoking info from the show, and we hope you had fun along the way. We know we did. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, hook up with us on our website at www.mondaysciencepodcast.com. Shoot us an email at info@mondaysciencepodcast.com. Find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube at Monday Science, and access episode summaries at mondayscience.medium.com. See you next week on the Monday Science Podcast.